Hello everybody, it's day 6 of NaNoWriMo, and well, first I voted. I did that early this morning, and then we spent all day in town doing errands, and we're back now and I'm tired. Look at our pretty wreath. My mom made this one. I'm really tired. I feel like I need a nap, but it's, I don't know, it's like 5 o'clock, so too late for a nap, and just, I'm just tired. Still tired, always tired, forever tired. I'll see what I can get done today. Otherwise, I'm gonna try to make up some word count tomorrow. Hey everybody, it's day 7 of NaNoWriMo, and I'm not really writing. I mean, I am. I'm just not writing something that I can count the word count toward my NaNoWriMo word count. I'm working on my story, still planning it, and I know last time I talked about kind of like how I plan a story, and I guess I wanted to talk about how I kind of go about the first brainstorming stages into planning my story. So brainstorming for me is just writing down the basic plot, the basic premise of the story, usually in a sentence or two. From there, like, that usually tells me what the plot is, like, usually. So once I have the premise down in my head and I kind of have this vague plot running through my head, I think about the characters, and usually because I've thought about the premise, I kind of know the main characters at the very least. When I know the main characters, all I really do, I don't do a whole lot of like getting to know your characters. I write a little bit about them, maybe a little bit of history that may be important to the story, and like why this character matters to this story. And I think about, you know, kind of what makes up that character, basic stuff of likes, dislikes, any imagery that comes to mind with the character. With those characters, like the main characters, I'm usually thinking about the secondary characters as well, the people who are in their lives, who may not be as important to the plot, but they're still there, so I still think about them. Could be family, friends, whoever. As I'm thinking about the characters and writing down any important information, I'm also kind of writing down the plot as well, because these character stories and the plot, they're one and the same. So as I'm sitting there going, this main character, here's his history, here's something's going to happen to him, and then here's what he's going to do. That's basically me plotting out the story, right? So writing down the characters, I write down as much of the plot as I can based on the premise and what I know about the characters. So that usually takes up a page of random information, not even bullet pointed, just in paragraphs. And from there I can usually see, oh, okay, that's pretty good. I might have a good beginning, might have a good end, might need to work on the middle, as is, you know, my working method. So once I have that down, I do my characters, like really write them down and kind of flesh them out. And that's where I'm doing like the story circle method, kind of, where I'm writing down, it should be 8 stages, but for me it's generally 11 to 13 stages for each character and the element of the plot, just because I like to repeat certain elements, you know. Yeah, so that takes me another page, a little bit more than a page sometimes, for each character. So for the main character, I write down their steps, their phases in like the story circle, as I've redone it for myself so that I kind of know what's happening. And I do that for all the main characters, and that takes quite a bit of work just to kind of think about it. And as I'm doing that, certain questions will come to mind and I have to write them down, because sometimes I don't know the answer to them, where I'm like, oh, what if this happens in the plot? I don't really know yet. I'm in the beginning planning stages, so I might write down some options for the plot that I will go over later and figure out what works best for my story for these characters, because I do like to stay true to the characters and their motivations. I don't want to just make something happen and have it not matter to the characters. Once I've had the characters' individual like story arcs done, I combine them into one story arc, which basically becomes my outline. So I redo my story circle outline thing, and for each stage I put all the characters together and I make sure it makes sense, that their storylines line up where they should. Like if I have characters coming in a little bit later, that their storylines still match up somewhere along the way and it doesn't seem too abrupt. Like I might plan out things that you won't even see in the story, just so that like I have a clear vision of what's happening with these other characters before they're even on the scene. I don't know, that's just what I do. So once I have the entire like main story circle with all the characters' elements, with all the characters' story arcs in it, that can be a few pages. That's basically how I like brainstorm and write down all of my character and plot information, because I don't think about the plot as like separate from the characters. That, I guess that's my main thing. When a lot of people say, oh, character versus plot, I mean, I always choose characters because I feel like the plot should be inseparable from your characters. Like if you didn't have these characters, this plot wouldn't be happening. Your plot should be dependent on your characters, not your characters on your plot, okay? Because if you can switch out any characters to have this plot happen, then that means your main characters are not strong enough, because they need to be able to hold the reader's attention and go on this adventure with the plot happening. It needs to matter. So I brainstorm the basics of the plot, and then I brainstorm my characters and their character arcs and put it together. And that becomes my outline for how I start to write. So yes, if anybody wants to know, I'm definitely character over plot, and I do think characters matter way more. So once I have the entire story arc, that's still just general stages of like at the beginning, these middle parts, the end. So I don't have scenes planned out. I just have, oh, character A does this and this happens to them, so then they have to make this choice. I have the generalities done. I don't have specific scenes. Now, some books for me don't require me to go any further, that I can just write from that generalized outline and do a lot of like discovery writing, because that's how I function. Is I am a big discovery writer. Sometimes when I'm planning, certain pieces of dialogue in certain scenes might come to mind, and so I'll write those down for future reference. But generally, like, I can kind of imagine scenes that fulfill these generalizations. For certain projects, I need to go further in and do index cards for specific scenes, and that will help me really narrow down the plot. So for people who like really intricate, detailed plots, this would be that stage for me, where I'm writing down each scene and the characters involved and what's happening, and basically like what maybe choice the character's making that leads to the next scene. That would be like the most detailed I would get. So yeah, that's my general process, and that's kind of what I do for everything. So I'll show you how I was basically brainstorming my current project. It's a little bit easier for me because it is the third book in this shared world that I've been writing. So I'm already familiar with the world building and a lot of the concepts. So I don't have to do as much out of my brain brainstorming, okay? Like I'm already familiar with a lot of it. And one of the main characters was in the second book, and their plot line was already hinted at. So I already kind of had their plot happening in the back of my head. So now all I had to do was really focus on it, make that character main character, and figure out the world around them, the plot that's happening around them, and the people who are involved in it. Everything I'm going to show you, it's not really spoilery, because most of the concepts I will be talking about I would mention in any summary for this book. So I'm not really that worried about it, because if I were going to summarize this book, it'd be all this information. But you are going to get to see some of the kind of concepts that I work with and some of the questions that I ask myself as I'm going, how it all kind of comes together for me. Okay, so I'll show you guys that, and then we'll see where I end this week of NaNoWriMo, since I haven't really been writing too much. Okay, so because I started off in an easier spot for this, basically this third book in this world, I'm already familiar with the character and some of the plot because it was introduced in the previous book. So this one follows a character called the Warden. They are my gatekeepers to the fairy world in this series. He has a story in the first book. It's a small amount. Like, if I want to say his story is probably somewhere in here. Like, he has a little bit to do with my characters in the second book entering the new world and kind of showing them a new part of the world, and it's kind of interesting. And then we move on from that back into the main plot, so it's kind of like a little sidestep area, but it's kind of necessary to help explain parts of the main plot and give you a little bit more world building for the story. So we only see the character for a little bit, but we get some of his plot, and it kind of makes you wonder what's going on with him. So basically how I start any brainstorming session for the story is I write the concept down. So this one I know is that I'm gonna be writing this like probably out of order, because this is how my brain goes. So Warden is a teenage warden who takes over his father's duty after he passes away, and it's basically like a bloodline, so they have no choice. These warden families, they are tied to the land, they are tied to the fairy realm in certain areas, to even certain fairy courts, I guess you would call them. So they are tied there for a reason. The teenager has to take over his father's duties. This takes place after my previous book, which I kind of titled The Hollow God. It's kind of a working series title as well, just because the concept of hollows in my world, half of this is me fighting with the camera. So in this warden's region, there is a locked hollow, which is introduced in the second book, and the wards around it are weakening, and he needs help for that, basically, before the fairy who's locked in the hollow is released. And that's what his story is in the second book, is that it's just basically introducing the concept of the hollows and introducing a little bit of his story and the fact that there are other wardens that he can go to for help. I'm not naming names. That's how I brainstorm. I don't usually come up with names or necessarily even the gender of the characters while I'm brainstorming, unless I kind of already have an idea of it. So none of these have names, and I just keep going with it. And I write the history down, and I go, here's something that's going to happen. And I will then just start writing a paragraph. Like, it will usually probably take a page, but it's going to be everything that I know about the plot, kind of from A to Z. So for me in here, I started with the concept that there are a group of students who perform a dangerous magic ritual, and when they're done, one of them is gone, and they have to go to the teenage warden to figure out what happened to their friend. And the warden has to realize that, you know, this kid was taken by one of the fae. That is the main plot. So I write out as much as the plot as I can, and usually that leaves me with some questions. So one of my questions at the end of writing all the plot down was that I wanted to know if we only follow the warden and the warden's point of view, or if we follow this kid who has disappeared. That was one of the questions that it left me with in this planning, was that I was like, oh. So I literally wrote down, do we see the kid in the Fae realm? And I still left it, and I was like, I don't know. And so usually me writing down everything I know so far leaves me with more plot or character questions. And I ended up writing down some notes for the sequel-ish, or just things to keep in mind for this character, for this part of the world, and what may end up being this series. Now, most of my series, they're crossover characters, crossover events, so the information I write down, I don't know if it'll be in this book, in a sequel to this book, or in another book where the characters cross over. I honestly don't know, but I like to write down the information anyway. I like doing that because, again, I write series, and me thinking about the entire plot, I have to think about it in terms of the series and what's going on in other books around it. So now, what I originally wrote down in here was the plot, but I realized I had left out one of the plot lines from the first book that was open, and that is that this warden wants help from other wardens. So I wrote another page of information. These were basically questions to say, who are the wardens who are going to help this character? What are they going to do? When are they going to show up on the scene? Are they going to show up in the middle of the book? Are they going to show up near the end? Like, when does this plot line come into play as opposed to the missing kid, right? So I kind of was asking myself questions, and I was saying, who are these other wardens? Because I had quite a few to choose from within this region, and I wanted to know who else is going to be coming. So I had to kind of mind map my way through the characters and what I know about them in terms of their own stories. I kind of wanted to look at who would be the best. So I would say, oh, warden set number 1 or set number 2. And they are completely different characters with different stories. They would probably be connected to different books. So this set 1 has, let's say, a coven attached to it, and this one is more about, let's say, the vampires. It just kind of depends where I want to go with the series. So if I want the Fae and the witches to stay in this book, then that's probably what I'll do. If I want to introduce more concepts, then maybe I will introduce the different characters. So this is kind of what I have to think about when I'm planning. And then I just ask more questions, and knowing things about my world helps because I've done a lot of world building. So I know more questions where I'm just writing them down, even if they don't end up being used for the plot. And then I ask myself, what about in the second book that I wrote, where the warden was just a secondary character? What about the characters that are in that book? They're obviously in the same region. They are crossover characters. Are they going to be seen in this book? Am I going to bring them back? Or do they want to interfere with this plot line, or are they going to leave it to them? Are they going to be busy with dealing with their own thing? I have to think about that. And then basically, once I'm done writing out every plot I can think of, writing down all the questions I can think of in terms of plot, what I could and maybe need to write about, that takes up 2 to 3 pages. And then I start in on this type of stuff. I start in thinking about the story circles, and I start with the characters and the story arc. So I might start with the warden's story circle. Do I write it in a circle? No, but you can. You can totally fill in the circle if you want. I don't, but I would sit there and go, this is the warden's story from beginning to end, and maybe I only cover the story with the missing kid, and then maybe I have to go back in and deal with the extra wardens that come in and the locked hollow and add that in, because this is the main plot, but this is like an impending threat that's going to wreak havoc while this is happening. So I might only be able to get from the missing kid and then go from stage 1 to 8 and fill it in as best I can, and then go into like the subplots, the wardens and the locked hollow. So that's kind of what I end up doing. And now, because I had the question of, oh, the kid in the Fae realm, what's his story if we're going to end up seeing him? Because that was one of my questions, right? Are we going to see him? So what is he dealing with while all of this is going on? Am I going to be switching point of views? That's something that I have to figure out. Like, is there room in this story to see this kid's point of view and everything he's dealing with? And already I'm kind of brainstorming what could be happening. Like, Fae he could be encountering, what kind of story, especially because I already wrote down some notes for the sequel or just beyond the end that involve this kind of concept. So do I want to follow it in this book before we get to the beyond? Do I already want to familiarize readers with everything that's happening in here? I think I do. I think that would be a really interesting place to go. So from there, I might do that. Whichever wardens I do, I will do the wardens circle and their stages 1 through 8, because even if they only come into this circle halfway through, like this story, they still got their own story going on, because they're involved in Covenant, or they're involved with vampires, or whatever. They have their own story. So it might be in their point like 4 that they decide that they're going to come help this young warden with his job. But I need to figure that out and do their own story circle and how they all interrelate, basically. At the same time I'm doing theirs, I'm probably going to link it to this one and tie it together. I'm going to do this story circle, combine it with this one. So basically in the end, I will have one big story circle, as my story circle is, with the repeating steps and all, with every section, every one of these sections having the storylines for my main character, the warden, the secondary characters with the kids, the other wardens, and the kid in the Fey realm, the Locked Hollow. Each section with these combined story circles will have all of the character arcs, all of the plot arcs happening. Okay, so once I have the big story circle with all the character arcs and all of the plot in one big story circle, once I have that, then I go into the real nitty-gritty. That's when I bring out index cards to write out my scenes, because each point for like number 1, then I will have to write out all the scenes. Like Act 1 doesn't just have 1, 2, and 3 for me. It's kind of a mini one of these inside this act. So, you know, I'm gonna have the setup with probably the warden, the kids, and whatever it is that's happening in their life. Like, you're gonna get some stasis for the warden, which is technically after the book that I just wrote. So you get to see this warden, his version of stasis, and then what he needs, which has to do with the Locked Hollow and getting help from other wardens. And then we get the enter the unfamiliar situation, and usually that's probably once the kid has disappeared, and then begins the searching. They're searching. So it's it's hard to explain, but this is basically how my brain works. So I'm like halfway through the warden story circle for the missing kid. So the next one I'm gonna do is this one and this one together, and then that one, and then whatever else I need to do. And then each of these like 5 pages, I will then kind of rewrite and combine into one bigger story document, so that each stage 1 will involve like a couple paragraphs for each character, okay, and each story plot. And then I break out these and I really go from scene to scene to scene so that I can have my little mini circles. So this is basically it. It's really hard for me to explain. I hope I did well enough, especially because I'm talking about a story that, you know, I'm still in the process of planning. If you guys want more information about any of this, like how I do the smaller story circles per act, if you want more information when I get to that point, if you want to see me combine all of my character story circles into one big one once I've gotten there, like if you want to see the next stages as I go, just let me know and I will continue to put those into like my Nano videos as I'm going, because I'm still going to be working on this probably throughout Nano. Now I'm not sure if I will be drafting it or if I will just be working on this as I go, because it's kind of an in-depth process. So if you just want to see more of this as I go so that I can go a little bit more in depth, yeah, just let me know. Okay, so hopefully my brainstorming process of putting together a story was understandable. Hopefully you guys could see how I put together a story, even from basis of stuff I already had in my mind. Made it a lot easier. All right, so that's pretty much it for now. I'm probably just gonna work on this stuff the rest of the week because I don't know. me and writing right now is not really happening. So I will do my little word count update in my planner and show you guys my progress, if any, that I make. So for now, thank you for watching, and thank you guys for all of your support. I really appreciate it. You can give this video a like if you liked it. Comment down below, let me know what you thought of showing you guys my brainstorming process. You can let me know how you guys brainstorm, if it's something similar to this process. I feel like a lot of people maybe brainstorm kind of the same way. Really, you just gotta write stuff down, right? Right. Writing takes writing. Oh yeah, I should learn that during NaNoWriMo, right? All right, so we still have a couple weeks left in NaNoWriMo. We shall see what happens. Thank you guys very much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye.